It's known as the 20th century's longest conventional war, a brutal 8-year conflict that totally reshaped the Middle East. But, for a lot of people, the Iran-Iraq War is still this really complex and kind of misunderstood chapter of modern history.
To really wrap your head around this war, you have to start with the human cost, which is just staggering. We're talking over 1 million casualties. That's military and civilian, from both sides. That number alone, it just tells you everything about the sheer devastation of this fight.
So, how did this whole thing even start? And what on earth kept it going for 8 brutal years, creating a stalemate that would just chew up an entire generation? Let's dig in and figure it out.
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the deep-seated origins of the fight. Then, we'll cover the initial invasion and Iran's pretty shocking comeback. After that, we dive into the long, grinding war of attrition. And finally, we'll look at the endgame that really left no one victorious.
You see, the roots of this war were this just dangerous cocktail of old grudges and brand new revolutionary fire. It was a perfect storm of history, territory, and ideology, all brewing at once. Okay, so when you look at why each side was fighting, it's like they were on different planets, but both were dead serious. On Iraq's side, you had Saddam Hussein. He ran a secular government with a Sunni elite, and he was terrified that Ayatollah Khomeini's revolution would spill over and inspire Iraq's own Shia majority to rise up. Plus, he saw a chance to grab the super important Shatt al-Arab waterway and become the new top dog in the Gulf. Iran's goals, they were almost completely ideological. They wanted to export their revolution and punish what they saw as Saddam's corrupt, aggressive regime.
And this timeline, wow, it really lays out just how fast things went off the rails. Back in '75, Iran was the big regional power, strong enough to force Iraq to make concessions on that waterway. But by 1979, the Iranian Revolution flipped the whole script. Saddam is looking at this and seeing two things: a huge threat from Khomeini's revolutionary ideas, but also, maybe, a golden opportunity. He figured Iran's military was a total mess after the revolution purged its best officers, so he made his move and invaded in September 1980.
And that invasion brings us right into our second chapter. Iraq was banking on a lightning-fast victory, a quick and easy blitz. What they got was something else entirely. So Saddam made this huge miscalculation. He thought the Iranian government would just crumble and that its people would welcome his troops. Nah, that's not what happened, not even close. The Iranian resistance was incredibly fierce, and the Iraqi army got bogged down in this absolutely brutal house-to-house fighting, totally derailing any fantasy of a quick win. And then, just like that, the tables completely turned. Starting in late '81, Iran launched a series of just stunningly successful counterattacks. You can see the big ones here, from breaking the siege of Abadan to that decisive victory at Fath al-Mobin. They used this combination of their regular army and waves of these young volunteer militias, the Basij, and they just systematically pushed the Iraqis back. The liberation of Khorramshahr in May '82, that was the big one. It was a huge strategic turning point that drove the Iraqi army right out of Iran.
This right here, this is probably the most important question of the whole war. Iran had won. They had defended their homeland. So why didn't the war just end right here in 1982?
The whole thing hinges on this one fateful decision. Saddam, who was staring defeat in the face, offered a ceasefire, a total withdrawal. But Ayatollah Khomeini said no. For him, this wasn't about territory anymore. It was about getting rid of Saddam Hussein's regime. So in July of '82, Iran invaded Iraq. And just like that, he locked both countries into 6 more years of absolute carnage. And that decision plunged them into the war's longest, deadliest phase, a brutal, grinding war of attrition that would eventually pull in the entire world.
The fighting on the ground, it turned into this horrifying echo of World War I. Both sides just dug in, creating these huge, complex networks of trenches. Iran kept using these human wave assaults against fortified Iraqi positions, which led to just astronomical numbers of casualties for almost zero gain.
But the horror wasn't just stuck at the front lines. To try and break the stalemate, Iraq started firing missiles and launching air raids against Iranian cities, aiming right for civilians to try and break their will to fight. Iran, of course, hit back. And this war of the cities meant that suddenly the war was right there, in your city, in your home.
And at the exact same time, the war spills out into the Persian Gulf. Both sides start attacking oil tankers, trying to choke off the other's economy. This so-called tanker war was a huge threat to the world's oil supply, and that, of course, got the big global powers involved, especially the U.S. Navy, which started escorting ships through the Gulf.
And this is where you can really see this thing morph into a global proxy war. Basically, the rest of the world looked at this and decided that an Iranian victory was way scarier than Saddam Hussein, so nearly everybody tilted toward Iraq. The US, the Soviet Union, France, they all gave Saddam weapons and intelligence, while the Gulf Arab states pumped in billions of dollars. Iran, on the other hand, was pretty much on its own, with just a little bit of support from countries like Syria and North Korea.
Okay, so after all those years of this grinding, bloody stalemate, what finally broke it? That brings us to the final, desperate phase of the war, the endgame, in 1988.
So after spending years on the back foot, a totally rearmed and reorganized Iraqi military just unleashes hell in the spring of 1988. They use this terrifying combination of conventional firepower and massive chemical weapon attacks, and they just shattered the exhausted Iranian lines. In a flash, they recaptured all the territory that Iran had spent years bleeding for.
So what finally pushed Iran to the table? Well, it was really a perfect storm of three crushing factors. First, people back home were just done. They were exhausted by the years of sacrifice and stalemate. Second, the horrifying toll of Iraq's chemical weapons was just becoming unbearable. And finally, a huge international incident. The US Navy accidentally shot down a civilian Iranian airliner. This convinced Iran's leaders that they were truly completely alone in the world.
So you've got a total military collapse on the horizon, and you feel like the whole world is against you? Iran really had no choice left. They finally accepted UN Resolution 598, a ceasefire they had said no to for over a year. Ayatollah Khomeini famously said accepting it was like drinking a cup of poison. The fighting officially stopped on August 8, 1988.
And after 8 years of unimaginable death and destruction, the result? Absolutely nothing. No significant territory changed hands. The borders were exactly where they were back in 1980. Well, I say nothing, but that's not quite right. The borders didn't change, but everything else did. Both countries were completely shattered economically, buried under mountains of debt. In fact, Iraq's massive war debt was one of the main reasons Saddam invaded Kuwait just 2 years later, which of course set the stage for the next Gulf War.
You know, when you look back at it, there was no winner here, only losers. And it leaves you with this one kind of haunting thought. After all the political ambitions, all the clashing ideologies, and all the geopolitical games, when the guns finally go quiet, who's really left paying the price?